Hello and welcome to my channel NBSoundHopperUK, and the subject of this video will be 10 albums of Peel sessions and BBC recordings from the 1970s and 1980s. Once upon a time, the BBC were at the forefront of providing a platform for contemporary music artists via television and radio. The Old Grey Whistle Test, later simply known as Whistle Test, Rock Goes to College, Riverside, Something Else and the Oxford Roadshow were among their television programmes, as well as the hybrid television and radio show Sight and Sound in Concert. On radio, artists recorded sessions for shows presented by the likes of David Jensen, Janice Long and Richard Skinner. However, the standout programmes were those presented by legendary broadcaster John Peel, without whom a considerable number of artists would never have got a look in. Eventually, the penny dropped at the BBC when somebody realised that releasing compilations of sessions or live performances would be of interest to the many people who either watched or listened to those shows. This video will focus on my favourite 10 albums composed of material recorded for the BBC. I've placed them in order of preference, or in other words, this is a ranking video. In 10th, it's the Lorries at the BBC by Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry. This 11-track disc came as part of the 3-disc compilation called See the Fire, Albums, Singles and BBC Recordings 1982 to 1987. It includes 3 sessions, 2 recorded for John Peel, broadcast in 1983, and 1 for Janice Long in 1984. Despite being far from one of my favourite bands of the mid-80s, the songs chosen for the sessions are a strong selection. If you don't already know, Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry were from Leeds and played mostly up-tempo, energetic post-punk that flirted with the fringes of goth. Conscious Decision from the first Peel session has the distinction of not having been released anywhere else, and I think you'll find the drum rhythm very similar to Transmission by Joy Division. Most of the material later appeared on their 1985 debut album Talk About the Weather, with the track Sometimes recorded for both the first and last sessions, which highlights how the band had reworked it. See the Fire and Monkeys on Juice, both from the second session, are my personal favourites, but as I suggested, this is a solid group of songs. In 9th, it's Ruts at the BBC by the Ruts. This is a disc that formed part of a box set entitled The Virgin Years. The 23 tracks were recorded for 3 John Peel sessions broadcast between January 1979 and February 1980, plus a BBC in concert performance from July 1979. There is quite a bit of overlap between the session and live material, but I don't think it's a hindrance to this disc at all. As you'd expect with a punk band, there's greater energy live than in the studio, and the in-concert recording is pretty darn good. The inclusion of I Ain't Sophisticated helps, as that's a track I particularly like for its sarcastic humour. The sessions are all great too. On the first of them is a track called Black Man's Pinch, which is in fact a working title for the reggae song Give Youth a Chance that appeared on the B-side of Something That I Said. Considering that In a Rut was their first single, having it in their third session seems a little strange, but I'm guessing it gave the band the chance to adapt the lyrics to have a pop at Sting, who made some less than enthusiastic comments about Owen's singing. Overall, a fine collection from a fine but alas short-lived band. In 8th, it's the Peel Sessions by Skids. Skids have a Virgin Years box set as well. The Peel Sessions disc includes 5 sessions broadcast from May 1978 to September 1980, comprised of 21 tracks. What I think gives this the edge over Ruts at the BBC is that it covers a longer period of time in which you can hear the development of the band. The first 9 tracks are from 2 1978 sessions and include all 4 tracks from the Wide Open EP, plus others that were eventually on their debut album Scared to Dance. There's also a version of TV Stars here, and it's the only studio version of that song I'm aware of. The 2 sessions from 1979 are really interesting, as there are 8 tracks and only Masquerade ended up on a studio album. So that leaves Summer, Hang On to the Shadows, Zit, War Poets, Withdrawal Symptoms, Hymns from a Haunted Ballroom and a cover of Walk on the Wild Side as unavailable elsewhere. Zit especially, I think, is excellent as it twists and turns in a similar fashion to Scale from Scared to Dance. The final session from 1980 is also intriguing as only Circus Games appears on their third album, The Absolute Game. The other three tracks appeared on the free companion album to The Absolute Game, Strength Through Joy, with the final session track, Snakes and Ladders, which is more Brian Eno than punk. Seventh, at the BBC 1974 to 1978 by Bop Deluxe, with 3 CDs containing 4 John Peel sessions and 3 in-concert performances, plus a DVD with appearances in 3 Old Grey Whistle Test shows and 1 Sight and Sound in concert. This is a terrific package. These sessions go up to 1978, making Bop Deluxe one of the few bands from earlier in the 70s to survive Peel pivoting towards punk and new wave. All in all, this exudes quality in playing and songwriting, but also illustrates what I consider to be the band's fatal flaw. Frontman and guitarist Bill Nelson introduces a couple of their singles by bemoaning futile attempts to make the hit parade, but the combination of poor song selection for singles or overblown guitar soloing for that kind of audience worked almost like a self-destruct button. Panic in the World from the 1978 in concert is one such track. It makes for a solid mid-tempo album track, but Dangerous Stranger was much closer to what might have sold well in the UK at that time. Despite that, though, this package is well worth the money with some superb renditions of Made in Heaven, Life in the Air Age, Modern Music, Blazing Apostles and Super Enigmatics, plus plenty of others. Sixth is made available by This Heat. This is 8 tracks from 2 John Peel sessions in 1977. With these sessions being recorded at the BBC Maida Vale studios, it doesn't require that much mental effort to work out how This Heat arrived at the title of the album. Although this was released in 1996, the sessions predate their self-titled debut album by the best part of 2 years. This Heat were at the experimental end of rock music and also incorporated elements of avant jazz, musique concrète and krautrock. Where it differs from a lot of earlier experimental music is in its directness, by getting to the point fairly quickly. In 1977, this would have been good timing, considering how, in the UK, the rulebook on how rock music should sound was being noisily ripped up. The first session is comprised of Horizontal Hold, Not Waving, and The Fall of Saigon, 3 tracks that would later appear on their debut. Of the 5 tracks in the second session, only Makeshift would make it onto an album, in this case their second studio album, Deceit. Therefore, for existing fans of the band, 4 previously unreleased tracks. For anyone who has not heard This Heat before and is curious, I'd say this album is a slightly gentler entry point, certainly production-wise, than their 2 studio albums, excellent though they may be. Before I go any further though, here's a glimpse at what's in the planning stages for this channel. Fifth is BBC Live in Concert by The Sound. As part of the 2014 box set reissue of The Sound's first 3 albums, this disc was thrown in as well. The 2 in-concert sets here can also be found on the BBC Recordings album released 10 years earlier. These sets were performed in 1981 and 1985, so this album is a good way of comparing and contrasting the band's approach to songwriting as they matured. The 1981 set includes tracks from their first 2 studio albums such as Heartland, New Dark Age and Skeletons, so lots of energy and smouldering angst. The 1985 set is slightly less energetic, and by this stage of their career there's a higher percentage of love songs which have more elaborate melodies. There are exceptions though. The drummer of Whirlpool has a trace of Siouxsie and the Banshees about it. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, I hasten to add. Final track, Missiles, comes from their debut album and is possibly the Sound's angriest song. If there's one thing the two sets have in common, it's that the band come across as being great live, sufficiently enough to make me wish that I'd seen them play back in the 80s. Fourth, After the Flood at the BBC 1968 to 1977 by Graaf Generator. Bit of a cheat here as the video title doesn't mention the 1960s. It's the first 3 tracks that come from a 1968 Top Gear session radio programme, nothing to do with cars. The opening track, People You Were Going To, will be familiar to anyone who has Peter Hamill's solo album Nadia's Big Chance. Unfortunately, the sound quality of this session is not that clever, but this is the only real downside to over 2.5 hours of excellence from several radio sessions, mostly for John Peel, as well as a John Peel concert from 1971. Disc 1 and the first track on Disc 2 cover the band up to their initial split in 1972. And in addition to People You Were Going To, there's Vision, another Peter Hamill solo album track. Amongst the others are After the Flood, Darkness, Killer, Theme 1 and Man Erg. The latter appears both in session and live, which is fine because it's one of my favourite tracks of theirs, especially the fantastically disorienting transition midway through the track. The rest of Disc 2 was recorded after reforming in 1975, and again, some excellent versions of tracks like Scorched Earth, La Rosa, Still Life and Masks. Judging from what I've seen on a few reviews channels, Graaf Generator remains something of a Marmite band, but I'm definitely in the pro camp. Third, BBC Sessions 1982 to 1984 by the Sisters of Mercy. A couple of Peel sessions with a David Kidd Jensen one sandwiched between them, recorded during a period when the Sisters of Mercy were really at the top of their game. Starting off with the 1982 session, Alice, Floor Show and a cover of the Stooges' 1969 would appear as tracks on their third single, released a couple of months after the session. The other track is Good Things, and this album sees its only official release, and it lives up to its name. The same can be said of Jolene from the second session. Yes, the song previously recorded by Dolly Parton. This session also has Heartland, Burn and Valentine. I've always liked the hypnotic and intense vocal repetition on Heartland. Burn and Valentine are both from the brilliant Reptile House EP, probably their darkest release. The final session was recorded with Wayne Hussey on guitar after his time with Dead or Alive and then going on to form The Mission. Of these 4 songs in this session, he co-wrote Walk Away and No Time to Cry. The other 2 tracks are Poison Door, later to be on the Walk Away single, and a cover of Hot Chocolate's Emma. Emma has lyrics on a pretty grim subject, and singer Andrew Eldridge really gives it the works, making it my favourite track on the album. Second, the Peel Sessions 1979 to 1981 by Killing Joke. I think of Killing Joke's early years as their songwriting and sonic peak. In terms of the 1980s, it was mostly downhill after their first 3 albums. So this album combines versions of some of their most enduring tracks from those albums, as well as a couple of tracks only available here and on the Unperverted Pantomime, a live performance from 1979, originally released as a cassette in 1982. Those couple of tracks are Malicious Boogie and Nuclear Boy. Malicious Boogie, apart from the occasional shout of Yowza Yowza, is instrumental. Its tempo is similar to Change. Although it doesn't quite have the same sense of urgency as Change, it's interesting nonetheless. Even more interesting is Nuclear Boy, which adopts the reggae feel of Turn to Red and throws in Jazz Coleman's keyboards, which have a bit of a Tom Robinson band sound about them. Those 2 tracks are from the first session, along with the always magnificent pair of War Dance and Psych. The second, third and fourth sessions mostly spotlight material promoting forthcoming albums. The Hum, Tension, We Have Joy and the aforementioned Change are particularly impressive. Those sessions were all for John Peel, but the last 3 tracks on the album were for a Richard Skinner show. That has Tension, maybe not at the same level as the Peel session version, plus Unspeakable and Exit, and their top draw stuff. And first, it's At the BBC by Siouxsie The Banshees. Of all the BBC recordings albums I've got or have heard or have had recommendations for, this is definitely my favourite by some considerable distance. It's an absolutely superb package. 3 CDs with 8 sessions, 5 for John Peel, 1 each for Richard Skinner, David Jensen and Janice Long, 2 live performances from 1986 and 1988, and then a 30-track, 110-minute long DVD with performances on the Old Grey Whistle Test, Top of the Pops, Something Else, Rock Goes to College, and the Oxford Roadshow. Oh, and there's a 34-page booklet as well. What this set highlights is a band who, for more than a decade, really sat on their laurels and were prepared to change things around whilst retaining characteristics that were inimitably their own. The fact that their first 2 Peel sessions were recorded before they even had a record contract seems pretty remarkable to me, and serves as a compliment not only to the band but also the mindset within the BBC at the time. There's so much here that it's impossible to pick out individual tracks as being favourites because there's quality stuff throughout. Unfortunately, this is no longer as cheap as it was when I bought it, but if you're a fan of the band, then try to get your hands on it. You won't be disappointed. Many other artists recorded sessions for the BBC which have been released on vinyl or CD. The Fall, for example, had a staggering 24 Peel sessions which were released on a 6 CD set. However, I've not heard it or heard anyone raving about it in a big way. So if you do have and like it, or a 70s or 80s collection that you'd recommend from any other artist, then please tell me all about it in the comments. In the fullness of time, I'm aiming to do a similar video about the 1990s, although I'll say this now, it's likely to have a greater focus on electronica than rock, shifting landscapes and all that. As per usual, I put links for a track or session for each of the albums in the video description and the almost obligatory like, subscribe, comment, etc. bits at the end of the video. In the meantime, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.